Well, mate, when I got here, the bushfire was the big issue. And when I went to see President Trump, he wanted to talk about the bushfires, what had been happening, what was going to happen to the land, the bushfires that occurred on, what about backburning and all that sort of thing. And I was getting ready to, go out there and talk about how we're going to encourage tourism to come back. And then I had a couple of ministerial visits, and before you know it, the COVID-19 crisis hit. And so I've been working from home for the last few weeks, and the embassy people, a lot of them have been working from home, and a lot of our time has actually been spent trying to help our fellow Australians get home, those who are on cruise ships, those who are stranded here. So it's been a bit of a baptism of fire, but it's also shown me the way our sort of network here with the consulates and the embassy can help our fellow Australians, and that's been really good to see.
And part of the brief, obviously, for you is to meet and greet, get to know all the people of Washington, all the power players. You've had to resort to Zoom and Skype and every other sort of technical way of doing it rather than in person.
Look, before the virus had started to take hold, I'd met some senior people from the administration already, and also some of the congressmen. But yeah, you're right, Timbo. A lot of this has had to be done through video conferencing, through the telephone system and all the rest of it. But look, what I found is people are very keen to talk. Americans are very friendly towards Australians, and there's a lot of goodwill in the administration, in the Congress, on both sides of the aisle. So politically, I think we're in a good space, and that's made my job a lot easier. But I have to say, watching what's been happening in the US on the COVID-19, what's been happening back home, it's brought home to me how in times like this, we've all got to work together. And we've been working with the administration on getting medical supplies to Australia, making sure they're not held up here, trying to help the US government in areas where we may have medical supplies that they need, that we don't need. So there's been a lot of cooperation. But yeah, you're right. A lot of it's been by remote control.
Now, I read in the Weekend Australian where you've endorsed the Prime Minister's push for an inquiry into China's place in the whole COVID-19 pandemic?
Look, on that, I think what the Prime Minister said is pretty sensible. We've had this major life-changing event, the biggest event probably of our lifetimes. We've got to work out what's happened, how it happened, and what can we do to make sure we're better prepared for the future if this were to happen again. And I think there are a lot of countries who are saying, yes, this isn't a bad thing to do. We did it after the Ebola crisis a few years ago. The World Health Organization and other bodies looked at what lessons we could learn from that. We've got to do the same again. I can understand, if you're the government like the Chinese, which is potentially, sort of feeling the pressure on this, that you'd be on the defensive. But my view is we've got a lot to learn from this. China has a lot to learn from this. We've all got a lot to learn by comparing how we did things, and in the early stages, working out what could have been done better. This is not an exercise in retribution. It's not an exercise in revenge or whatever. This is about getting the facts. And a lot of countries are telling us it's not a bad idea to do this. Let's wait until the virus has settled a bit. But already there's action this month, in fact, at the World Health Assembly. The European Union are putting up a resolution about these matters, and we'll be backing that in because we want everybody to feel that we understand what's gone on and we'll be better prepared next time.
Ambassador, you added that it's very important to have a strong China, but Australia and the US, for that matter, needs to push back where it feels it's warranted.
Look, China is an emerging superpower. And I've said before, including my final speech to the Senate, a strong and prosperous China is in the interests of the world. But we also have to accept that everyone should live by the same rules. So in circumstances where China are saying they don't want to live by the same rules as other countries, what we call the rules-based order, we've got to say, no, everybody's got to follow the same rules. And it's, of course, incumbent on us as Australia, on the US and other countries to make sure that we're promoting these shared values, because these values that have underpinned what we call the global rules-based order have helped to guarantee the prosperity of the world since 1945. So it's important for all of us to be on the same page.
Such a different story, a tale of two countries, Australia and the United States. Obviously, we're very, very different. We're sparsely populated here in Australia. There's so many differences, but how is it there? Because there's 30 states now saying that they are going to lift restrictions. Dr. Anthony Fauci is coming out, really trying to get them to be cautious.
Look, what struck me, Tim, actually being here on the ground, how diverse this country is. It's a big country, not only in terms of size, but also population, a lot of big cities and a lot of different places. And so there's a lot of decentralisation in what goes on. Not all the power resides in Washington. So it's not a surprise that you get some differences of view, depending on the impact of the virus, about what people should do. The point that Fauci is making, which has been picked up at federal level here and state level, is that we need to obviously up the testing here and make sure that when restrictions are coming off, we're in a good position to test people, trace what's going on, and be able to deal with it quickly. But it is a major logistical issue in a country like this. And also you have to remember, it's a democracy. So you've got to bring people with you. You can't just impose things and expect people to just follow suit automatically. So it's the evolution of policy here is going to be ongoing. In Australia, while we have states and territories, through Scott Morrison's innovation of the National Cabinet, we've been able to bring everybody together and work in a coordinated way. And that's been a great innovation to see. And it'll be interesting at the end of all this to compare the different ways in which different countries have approached this and what we can all learn from each other.
From your point of view, what's the view from the US on how well Australia has done so far?
Well, everybody I talk to, including at the highest levels of government and elsewhere, I think are impressed with the way Australia's gone. I think they're impressed at the fact that we started to close borders early, the fact that we took early action on social distancing and lockdowns and all the rest of it. And I think they feel that as a country, we've got it together. And I think it's impressed them a lot. And that's certainly something that helps me in my job when they realise they're dealing with a country that is competent, knows where it's going, and that we can work together and in a united way when things are required. And that also goes to foreign policy. What's been interesting is the way both the government and the federal opposition on the major issues of our external relations have been in lockstep. And that's an important signal to the rest of the world about us being a united and clear-eyed country which knows its national interest.
How's the health crisis playing into politics at the moment? You wouldn't know it, but we're only 6 months away from a presidential election. We've seen a little bit about it today, but generally speaking, it's just washed down the river with this huge story.
Well, the election is there. Clearly, that's the backdrop to the whole virus thing. There's no doubt about it. The president clearly, before this began, was working on a narrative which he used in his State of the Union address around the strong US economy as the basis for his re-election. He's now having to deal with the virus, but I think he's very keen to make sure that he can create a sense of optimism about the way the US can recover from this and recreate the sort of conditions that were there before. I think the administration, from people I talk to, are optimistic that the US economy can bounce back because they feel that there's been a lot of firepower, monetary and fiscal policy being put into the system. The savings rate here has gone up, so there's plenty of firepower for consumers when they start to become more confident and come out of this. So I think there's a hope that the economy can bounce back. I think the reality is, as you know from the election last year, Tim, this far out, you just don't know which way these things are going to cut. And there's still a way to go. And both sides, the Democrats and the Republicans, are very strong. Lots of money being raised. So, and there's plenty of time to go. And as you know, in these things, there'll be a lot of accusations being thrown around in the course of a robust democratic system. So there'll be plenty for us to be fascinated by over the next few months, mate.
I've got 3 children similar age to yours. So, well, that's one thing. We're all going through this together, aren't we? Like the homeschooling and other issues. How is the Sinodinos household coping?
Oh, look, it's been good because the homeschooling is a good way to keep the kids occupied. I have to admit, Isabella, the middle child, is much better at doing her homeschooling than Alexander, the youngest, who refuses to do homework at school anyway. So he's been a bit more of a challenge. But, I mean, we've adapted to the new normal. I'm fortunate that I can have a home office here at home. And so that gives me an opportunity during the day to focus on my day job. And we've adapted as best we can, mate. But like a lot of people, we're looking forward to when some semblance of normality can be restored.
You're a person that has learnt to appreciate things. You went right to the edge with your own health battle. How do you look back at that now, Ambassador? Is it almost like a pre-cancer and post-cancer life for you in some way?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, because up until I'd had the cancer, I'd never really been sick in my life. I'd had the odd cold, never been to hospital. So then when I went through that, and I was at a stage 4, so I had to get treatment pretty quickly once they discovered what the problem was. So that meant going straight to hospital, resigning from the ministry and all the rest of it, and having lots of chemotherapy and then a bone marrow transplant in April of 2018, and then spending the rest of that year recovering from the side effects of the treatment. So that left quite an impression on me. First of all, it made me appreciate our health system, how good it really is. Most of my treatment was at St Vincent's in the public system, and that was great. That's in Sydney. It made me better understand what other people go through when they've been through a major trauma or an illness. And I think even though I was empathetic before, I have a better understanding of people now because of that. And I think it's made me more charitable about human nature and the need to cut people slack, because you don't always know what people have been through. And while physical sickness is one thing, it also taught me the importance of thinking about mental health as well, and the need to compartmentalise things so that your life is not dominated by the cancer or anything else.
Look, I think personally, I think it's fantastic that we have someone of your calibre in a role like you are in, and having been with Prime Minister John Howard, seeing the way that he conducted himself through the years. Finally, looking at Prime Minister Scott Morrison, we seem a long way away from that trip to Hawaii during the bushfires, don't we? What have you thought of his performance through all of this?
Well, I'm a public servant these days. I don't get into the politics, but if I step away from that and just talk personally for a minute, I think what the crisis demonstrates is everything I've observed about the Prime Minister over the 20 or so years that I've known him. That when he gets the bit between his teeth, when there's a job to be done, he works harder than anybody else. He really studies up. He just spends his whole time working out, what do we need to do? How do we do it? And I think he's exemplified those attributes during this crisis. And I think that's important as a way of encouraging the public to have confidence. And the fact that he's brought the National Cabinet together, which includes both Labor and Liberal premiers and chief ministers, I think has been important to show that we're working as one country on all of this.
And I suppose that was going to be finally one last one. It has crystallised, no doubt, for you how much we are the lucky country, looking back on Australia from where you are.
It's true. People used to say the lucky country was a bit of a derogatory expression, but we have made our own luck. It's been hard work that's been able to get us through this crisis. And I don't think Australians should ever underestimate how innovative, how practical, and how focused we can be when the crisis demands it. And I think we've exemplified those qualities, and those same qualities, I think, will get us through the recovery and create the basis for a stronger Australia going forward.
Ambassador Arthur Sinodinos, thank you so much for joining us, and all the best to you and the family.
Thanks, Timbo.